Hey everybody, it's been a minute since I've made a video, but I have a few things in the works that I'm thinking about and kind of a little vloggy series about the Trumps that I'm excited to get to work on. It's going to take me some time to kind of get it the way that I want it though. But I thought, let's do a video. I've had my channel for a minute. And I noticed recently that I've been getting a lot of comments on early videos, maybe because I haven't been making many new ones. But I thought, one of the things that you discover as a tarot reader is that you evolve in your journey over the course of your time as a reader. You know what I mean? You're going to grow, your opinions are going to change, your techniques are going to change, and I think they improve certainly as you get more experience and you get older. So, what I wanted to do in this video is just share some things that I used to do that I don't anymore, and things that I used to sort of not do that I do. And, really it's just an exploration of how I've evolved as a reader, but also, for a new reader, if you're approaching this video, to sort of understand that, like, there are going to be things that you think now that you won't later, and there are going to be things you can't imagine doing that you're going to do one day. You know what I mean? It's just kind of how we evolve if we stick with it. One of the things that was really important to me back in the day were elemental dignities. And I'll throw up a little chart to show you kind of what that means. But essentially, it was the relationship between the elements and how some elements were adversarial to other elements, others were complementary to other elements. Essentially, the hard elements, wands and swords, were complementary. The soft elements, water and earth, were complementary. But then like fire and water were adversarial. I used to use that a lot, and the principal spread that I used kind of for general readings at the time was a 5 card elemental spread. So there was a position for each of the elements: fire, water, air, earth, and spirit. Um, and that was something. It was a huge part of how I read, and I don't use that spread anymore, and I don't use elemental dignities anymore. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with it, but as I became I don't know what the word is. I think in part as I became more interested in the elements themselves, I realized that they all have contextual interplay with each other. And there are times where they get along and there are times where they don't. But like the elemental dignities as a sort of essential core of how I read evolved. And now I'm the elements might be the most important part of how I read, honestly, because they kind of dictate to me the subject of the reading when it comes to at least the 4 suits. And so as a reader, what I'm always looking at is like, what's the dominant suit in a spread? And that'll tell me a few things. It'll tell me maybe where things are out of whack. If there's too much of an element in a particular reading, that'll give me a clue. If there's a lot of swords in a relationship reading, I might wonder whether communication is happening or whether someone's overthinking something. If there's a lot of cups in a work reading, I might wonder whether they're putting too much of their emotional investment and sense of their ego into work, for example. If there's a nice balance of elements, then I'm like, things seem to be nicely in order. Uh, and I also try to think very literally about the elements too. Like, what is the thing, and how would it interact with other elements? Fire is very dependent on the other three. Fire needs 3 things. It needs something to contain it, so water can contain it so it doesn't get out of hand. It needs air to burn, to eat, to oxygenate it is what I mean, and it needs fuel to eat. So I think about swords, as being the thing that allows fire to burn, earth as the thing that it feeds on. If you think about, sadly, if you think about wildfires, for example, it is fuel from the ground, from the earth that it's feeding on. And water can contain it and stop it from getting out of hand, or it can try to, right? So I'll think about the way that the way the elements dance together, the way they impact each other, the way they flow together. Fire and water can be very complementary, because fire and water can be an engine. If I'm doing a reading for someone about their work life and they're really feeling stuck, a balance of fire and water is going to be a great sign that they can create some steam to push forward. But if there's too much of one or the other, like, fire may evaporate water or water may put out the fire. And so if there's too much water in a reading about being stuck, I might say, somehow you need to sort of adjust the way your emotions are impacting this, or get more fire. Somehow you're not, your emotions are sort of putting out the energy that would get you to do what you need to do to progress, right? So the way the element, and then what the element is, so fire, and how it behaves. Fire can be incredibly powerful. It can be incredibly necessary. Heat, warmth, the sun. It can, as we see in the world, be very destructive with wildfires and house fires. And, so how the element is behaving in a reading is going to depend a lot on the reading. It's going to depend a lot on the question. Water is similar to fire. I think fire and water are the two most powerful, most dominant elements of the four, because they can be equally destructive and equally creative. The water suit can be cleansing, it can be refreshing, it can be fluid, it can drown you, it can overwhelm you, it can evaporate, it can, create a surge. So each of the elements has behaviors. Air, if you have ever had sort of too much air, like too much oxygen, you can start to get a little heady, right? Which is perfect for the Suit of Swords. Or if you like go up in altitude, right? The way that we feel in different air qualities can impact us. If there's a lot of heat, a lot of fire in a swordsy reading, then maybe the air is very hot. Maybe the quality of the thinking is very hot. And earth is very grounding, and it's necessary. It's what we feed off. If there's no pentacles or coins in a reading, sometimes I'm going to say, well, are they grounded enough? Or is the problem that they don't have anything kind of holding them down or rooting them? But it can also get stuck. You can get really rooted and stuck and conservative with earth sometimes too. So rather than elemental dignities, what I've evolved into is the thing where they all have plus and minuses, they all work together, and they all have sort of advantages and disadvantages based on what the context of the reading is and how they're working together. So that's how I work with the elements today, as opposed to sort of having an elemental spread and working with elemental dignities. Again, there's nothing wrong with elemental dignities if you use them. It's just that, this is, again, the tale of a journey from one place to another. And there's a line in an interview about the movie Hedwig and the Angry Inch where the guy who wrote the music, Stephen Trask, says, we knew this is where we were coming from, it's not where we're going. And I think that's a thing as a learner that's really helpful to think about too. Like, wherever you are now is not where you're going, it's where you're coming from. So that's maybe one of the biggest changes. The next biggest change is, if you, one of the most popular sets of videos I think I'd ever done were the ruminations on the cards. And I went through the cards, I think by number, or by suit. I think it was by suit. And I really talked about my individual impression, my individual feeling about each of the cards. And I still retain that, but I read the cards today with much less of an individual focus. If you watch my channel at all, you know that I really preach the gospel of reading 3 cards at least. And there's a reason for that. And it's, again, the way they dance together. And it helps me, again, see a balance or imbalance of elements. It helps me see a dominant element or a non-dominant element. And so that feeds me a lot of information. But the way they play together is really important too. And so I'm less concerned now than I was at that time with the individual meanings of the cards. I do think you need a sense, a foundation, a framework to sit on or to stand on as a reader. And so, that was my foundation. But these days, what I'm doing is something a bit different. And it's really, this comes from Robert M. Place. I talk about this all the time. It's really using 3 cards to replace the idea of 1 card. And so I have a lot of videos on this. I won't spend too much time kind of dwelling on it. But the idea being that we are watching the cards talk to each other, watching the cards dance together, and that the individual meanings don't matter at their core. They are all kind of blank, whether you're reading pips or not, at the moment until they're placed in the context of a question in a reading. And then they start to take on meaning based on the way they dance with the question, based on the way they dance with each other, based on what my eye picks up, you know. And so I really try to listen to that dance, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but it does to me. You know, I sort of listen to the way they're interacting with each other. I look at the way they're interacting with each other, and I'm going to say, oh, okay, yeah, boy, the way that Eight of Pentacles is walking away from justice really says something strong about this person's sense of right and wrong, for example. So the individual meaning, I subscribe to this thing that Camilla Elias says all the time, and I think I have a, you know, as we all do, we all sort of internalize things differently. I think I have a different kind of impression of or understanding of what this means, but the cards don't mean anything. And I do believe that until the moment, you know, the tarot, I always joke, you know, it's like an inert object until the moment where the a question and cards slam together, and then there's meaning, and then the cards can start answering questions. I really preach neutrality now, and what I try to do with students and in these videos and as a reader is to remind myself and them that it's not about what the card means so much as having a sense of what the card could potentially suggest. uh, at the time I made those videos, I really wasn't reading pip decks very much. And one thing that I've learned from doing that is, you know, the image is a tool that we use to read, but it's not the entirety of the card. And you know that if you work with multiple decks, because decks have different interpretations, even of the same source images, even of Pamela Coleman Smith's, you know, original artwork. That was itself based on older traditions too. Um, but the idea being that, you know, when we look at the Three of Swords, we think we see something and we think it's negative. But if we try to remove the value judgment and the things that we've learned about the cards over the years and accept that maybe there's something beyond what we think we see, we can find other things in the image. And so you always have that foundation to reach for. If you're stuck and nothing's making sense, you have the card meanings to help you. But they aren't they are where you came from, not where you're going, to use that phrase again. So that's another thing that's really changed for me, is that I don't do sort of individual card meanings as much as I once did. Um, I I read the cards with much more neutrality. I don't sort of, I mean, I guess I always sort of thought that there weren't really positive or negative cards, but even more so now than before do I think that there really aren't positive or negative cards. There are the cards, and whether they're positive or negative has everything to do with context. Context, you know, how many times have we talked about that on this channel? It's everything. It really is. And I think I would have said that back then too, but I was much more sort of working from a place of the Three of Swords means this. And a part of that too comes from the fact that the elements are so important to me as a reader, because when you look at, for example, the Suit of Swords, there are times where, you know, the 3, the 9, the 10, there's something about those that just may not connect to intellect. Why is our suit about communication and language and learning and thinking and writing and talking all negative, you know, where the Suit of Cups is largely positive? You know, our emotions can make us feel really shitty sometimes. So, you know, and we can overfeel. We can overfeel as much as we overthink. So the whole deck is neutral. And that's another thing that I think I would say has evolved for me as a reader. I made a video recently about the courts and how that's evolved, so I won't spend a lot of time dwelling there, but I do read the courts differently now. If you haven't seen that video, I'll try to remember to put the link below. But it's a lot about people now and behavior, and it probably took me the longest amount of time to understand the court cards, because I needed to figure out what kind of reader I was, and it took me a really long time to do that. So if you want to know how I read the courts now and how I used to, you can check that out in my older video. It's just a month or so old. Another thing that really changed for me was how I understand the major arcana, or the trumps. And this was a long evolution too, but I learned, I think like many of us, that the trumps are major. They are these big expressions of big ideas. And when they show up in a reading, something massive, major is going on. And I don't think that way anymore. I don't really view the trumps differently from the pips or the courts. Really, they have the same level of power to me, but they're going to depict a different experience. You know, a lot of us frequently hear that the Trumps represent archetypes and the Fool's Journey and all of those things, and I sometimes don't think we're all on the same page about what those words mean. I think a lot of us hear archetypes. Most of us don't go back and go to Jung. You know what I mean? We just hear archetypes and we've heard it our whole lives and we sort of know what it means, but it doesn't mean we're on the same page about it. I've talked about this with intuition too. I think, it's that I can't remember the line from The Princess Bride. It's like you keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means. I feel like for most of us, that's the case with words like intuition and archetype, and because we don't go to the root, which is fine. And I'm not shitting on anyone for that. I'm just saying we all do it. And when it comes to archetypes and the Trumps, it's like what I really think about them now is that they're just a metaphor for an experience, and a metaphor is just a poetic way of describing something. And, when you see the Empress, it doesn't mean you're literally about to become an Empress. It means you're about to have an Empress-ish experience. So, the same goes for Death or the Tower, and the degree to which that card is behaving either positively or negatively or, otherwise, it has to do with the context. And the size of the card is gonna change based on the scope and the size of the question. An example I use in your tarot toolkit is if you get the Tower in response to a reading about what's going to happen at this holiday party meeting today, it doesn't mean that the company is going to close and everyone's going to lose their job. It might mean that someone blows their temper, or something that's appropriate for that. So it's a metaphor, it's a story, it's when we think about a metaphor like she is the wind, um, it's not that she's literally the wind. We know she's not the wind, but when a poet or a writer or a person says, she's the wind, you have an experience of her or whoever that is different than if you just said, wow, she's really fast, or wow, she really gets around, whatever. Now, the way that we receive that metaphor is going to change based on our own impression of wind and maybe what we know about her, but we still get information out of it that we wouldn't have other had. We have an emotional response to it that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And so when you see the Empress, when you see the Tower, when you see Death, it's an expression of a metaphor. It's describing a feeling or an experience that isn't literal, that answers the question. And so our job as a reader is to sort of figure out what the metaphor is in this context and how it answers this particular question. But they're much less italicized for me. I don't really look at them as different in the sense that they're bigger, just that they tell their information or their story in a different way, if that makes any sense. The Eight of Pentacles is sort of this combination of eight and pentacles, of eight and earth, and then maybe an image, maybe a numerological association. The Tower is a different, maybe more visceral experience, but we still work with them the same way, and they still dance with the question in the same way. I keep using the word dance because I feel like when I'm reading well, it does feel like a dance. There's this sort of fluidity between the cards and me, and it's very expressionistic, and we're in tune with each other. We're I used the word listening earlier, which may not make sense in dance, but I feel like when people dance together, especially if they're doing like a partnered dance, their bodies really have to listen to each other. They have to know where they are in space, even when they can't see everything. So dancers kind of have to feel and listen to their bodies in the same way that tarot readers have to sort of feel and listen to the cards, the way they dance together, the way we dance together. It's this very kind of intimate thing when you think about it. And it's cool. And when we get out of our way, we can have a really good experience. And that's a thing that's changed for me too. And I think this just comes with time. But I'm less, not always, but I'm generally less caught up in my own ego as a reader and worrying about whether I'm going to get it right or wrong, and more about answering the question. And I try to focus on that. Just answer the question based on these cards. Make it as logical as you can based on the information you have. And if you do that, you've succeeded. I can't control whether I got a prediction right. I can't control whether the answer is going to be helpful to them. I can't control whether they're going to respond to it. There were too many things that are out of my control. The querent's mood that day, a choice that they make after the reading, and any number of things can impact whether I wound up being right or wrong. The essential for me is that I answered the question logically, that I would be satisfied with that answer if I got it, and that I got as close to the heart of the matter as I could. And that has proven to be successful for me. I encourage students and people who are learning not to worry too much about the feedback that they get from querents, because it's not unbiased, even if you don't really know the person. They're bringing all of their selves and their neuroses and their whatever, their hopes and dreams and fears and things they try to hide from themselves. They're bringing this whole complexity of themselves to the situation. So whether or not they liked the reading doesn't matter, which sounds, I know, kind of cruel. It's that the answer was given. Tarot doesn't care whether you're ready for the answer. You know what I mean? You ask the question, you're going to get the answer. Maybe you're not ready to hear it, but tarot doesn't know that. It's a translation tool between us and whatever is beyond us, or whatever energy makes answers happen. And so when a person doesn't like the answer, that's just how it goes. I'll refund someone if they didn't like the answer that much. But it rarely happens, I think, in part because when we get out of our way, when we get out of our ego, when we really focus on the question, and this takes time, when we really focus on the question, we're not thinking about us and we're just getting in the dance. And so I'm much less self-conscious now. Even in recent years, I have fewer moments of like, oh, fuck, I'm so bad, or I'm an imposter. You know, the focusing on, let me get the answer. Based on, I have all these tools to help me get the answer. Let me just use them. I have numerology, I have the picture, I have the elements, I've got the myth, I've got the metaphor, I've got what I read in Rich Pollock, I've got what I read in Robert M. Place, I've got what I read in hundreds of books over the years. Any number of those things may solve or unlock the reading. Let me just use those rather than getting caught in my head about whether or not I have value as a reader. I guess the final thing really is the kind of reader and questions that I am and will work with. I I was kind of born and raised as a tarot reader through the American Tarot Association, and there was a very specific kind of ethical worldview that was part of the ATA, and I think um, I think it was helpful for a lot of us, but I also, in retrospect, think it was a little problematic. Not, I don't think that was the intention. The intention was to elevate the public at large and their impression of tarot and tarot readers. But I think it did kind of associate fortune telling with criminal behavior, and there's a lot of problems with that I think stem from misogyny and racism. And I don't think that I'm not saying the ATA was misogynistic and racist. I'm saying that the idea that a fortune teller is a criminal or should be associated with fraud stems from a lot of problematic stereotypes about fortune tellers that come from misogyny and racism and other isms that are part of a dominant culture's desire to suppress anyone who might show them to be frauds. Like that's why, fortune telling has a bad reputation, not because there's a huge history of fraud. Fraudsters, when a fortune teller who's a fraud gets outed in the public, it's a big story because it's usually they've done something really fucked up. But how many of those stories do we actually really hear? Not that many. Like most people who practice fortune telling are not attempting to defraud the public. So to equate fortune telling with fraud is problematic. And so rather than addressing the stereotype, they just sort of lumped all fortune tellers as criminal and bad and opportunistic, and really kind of took that out of tarot. And to me, that was the thing that I had to free myself from as a reader. And I really I do call myself a fortune teller, kind of winky, in a snarky way, but I really, it feels like the most apt name for what it is I do, which is I read cards. You know what I mean? I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained in any of those things. I don't have healing powers. I'm not a practitioner of like energy healing. I'm not a medium. You know what I mean? I'm a card reader, and I will tell the future. Um, and a lot of times, it's like the future's pretty predictable because people aren't we have habits, you know what I mean? So like it's not even that hard to predict the future cuz we kind of know what we're going to do before we do it. And so the way that I think about myself as a reader, the way that I approach reading, the kinds of questions I'll work with are hugely different. I've made many videos about this, but I will do a third party reading. I will answer the question if they're cheating because I actually think there's something useful in those questions. When someone comes to you and says, "Are they cheating?" There's that old cliche that like, "Oh, if you have to ask, you already know the answer." Haha. And no, that comes from a deep insecurity. And what the person is really asking is, "Am I safe?" And a reading can help them understand whether or not they're safe, and maybe whether they should explore, even if the person is not cheating, why they don't feel safe, And I think a reading can help with that. I think a third party reading can help us empathize with people because we may think they're behaving a certain way because of something we did or in response to something, that has everything to do with us when in fact it just has nothing to do with us. And they had a fight with their boss, or they're in a bad mood, or they stubbed their toe, or whatever. You know what I mean? We can sort of like not jump to conclusions when we do a third party reading. Why is mom acting this way? Why is my partner being this way? What do I do about my sister's ex-husband? Like these things can really help us understand our world, and people have a huge impact on our lives. I think one of the things that I think more and more over the last 5 or so years is that there's a branch of tarot that's become really focused on like almost sort of like the secret sort of positive empowerment, self-empowerment. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that except when it becomes spiritual bypassing and except when it disconnects from the reality that we are not autonomous beings all the time. There are obstacles in our way that have nothing to do with us and that we have very little control over. And that includes other people. It also includes systemic racism, institutional misogyny, poverty, ability, mental health. All of these things are things that no amount of positive thinking can help us overcome. Maybe they can help us get through those obstacles, but thinking positively and having like a self-empowered attitude isn't going to help me get through my struggle with addiction or the fact that I keep getting low wage jobs that I get let go from when the economy gets bad. You know what I mean? Like those are things that are really largely out of my control. And so I think it's helpful in readings to think about what's not in our control. I think it's helpful in readings to explore why or how someone may be impacting us or why they're doing what they're doing, because they may not even know themselves. That's the other thing is like we assume they know what they're doing and they probably have no idea they're doing it. Because again, people are people. We have weird things about us that make us weird little nuggets of energy and anxiety and hope and meanness and kindness. I've never really thought of myself as a weird little energy nugget, but that may be what I call all of you from now on. You weird little energy nuggets. So those are some main ways in which my readings have changed over the years. And I think if you do, if you go back and watch my older videos, you can see there's certainly an evolution. I'd been in tarot for 10, maybe years at the point I made that. I mean, I think maybe a little less, but I was a solid reader at that. Whoops. I ran out of time. So anyway, I was wrapping up. What I was saying ultimately is that I was at the time making videos that I really wanted to find out there and that I couldn't. I was making the kinds of videos I wanted to be seeing myself. I wanted to get answers to questions that I had that I don't even think I know I had. And because they weren't out there, I had to do it myself, which is kind of the best way anyway. So I lucked out in that way. And I think without this channel, I certainly wouldn't have maybe gotten the confidence to write the 2 books. So that's this video. That's some ways that I have changed as a reader since I started this channel. And hopefully if you watch some older videos, this helps you kind of understand how I got where I am now and how, I used to think and how I think now and what's changed. And Yeah, I don't know. So I have a series of videos I want to make about the Trumps, and I'm sort of just figuring out how I'm going to make that work and how I want it to look and be. I'm kind of excited about it, but it's going to be a lot of work. I constantly keep giving myself these massive projects that negate the fact that I am tired. So I hope this was interesting for you. I hope you enjoyed it. How have you changed? I'd love to hear a response video. How have you changed as a reader in your evolution? What do you think now you didn't think before? What are you doing now that you would have never done before? Like, I never would have done third party readings, never would have done fortune telling. Now it's kind of my core jam. So yeah, let me know. With that, I hope you're well. I hope to see you soon, and I hope to make more videos soon. I really am trying to sort of like figure out how to sort of get the quality that I want with the budget that I have and the space that I have. So take care, be good, get your shot, damn it, and have a good day.